as I say, in 2005, I had information from a Parisian police officer. I met him at the Louvre, by the way, and that's where we sat and talked. And he told me he had a person that he knew of that was in Miami, who was a Frenchman who had access to the Vermeer and the Rembrandt seascape. It's called The Storm Over the Sea of Galilee. So I was able to get introduced to this individual in Miami, and I was undercover as a very rich dealer who had clients who wanted to buy these paintings. And we negotiated a price of $30 million for the two paintings. Throughout that 3 year operation, we did recover, let's see, two Picassos worth 60 million that were stolen from Picasso's granddaughter Diana from her apartment.
Welcome back to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. James?
Hey, Ray, good to have you here.
Absolutely.
And we have another special guest, don't we?
We do. We have an incredible guest today. This person is responsible for the recovery of more than $300 million in stolen art and cultural property in the span of his 20-year career with the FBI. He's been involved in numerous arrests around the world. He developed and is the founder of the FBI's art crime team, what they call ACT, A-C-T. So you may hear him talk like that and give that acronym ACT. You'll know what that is then. He's also the FBI's national expert on cultural property crimes, and he has conducted hundreds of investigations in museums and with international police departments around the world. He's also the author of the New York Times bestseller, Priceless. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Wittman. Bob, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Ray. It's a good intro. It's almost, hey, Jim, it's almost as if I wrote it myself.
Well, you did give that to me, you know.
I do know.
But it's all accurate. I checked. It's all accurate.
It is. It's all good. It's all good.
At least it's on my website, so it must be real.
Yeah, that's what they say, right? But you know what the funny thing is Bob, you have an unbelievable background, but you're different than anybody we've ever had before in the fact that most of the individuals that we brought on had their training in law enforcement. They learned how to investigate the crimes that they were involved in because of the FBI or the department or the ATF or the DEA, wherever they were at. But you're widely recognized for your contributions in the field of crime investigation, and you're considered an expert in the recovery of stolen cultural artifacts. You've had a huge impact on the efforts to combat illegal trafficking of art and cultural heritage. But your beginnings are different than anybody else. Tell us about your background and your beginnings and how you got to where you were.
Well, I'm like everybody else. When I started at the FBI, Ray, just like you, there was a great TV show I used to watch. It was called Miami Vice. And I wanted to be Crockett. I wanted to be that guy on that cigarette boat down in Miami Harbor wearing a white suit, driving a Ferrari or a Porsche. And I thought the only way I could do that would be to be an FBI agent. So, I applied to get in and went to the academy, and I went through the whole program. And of course, they asked me where I wanted to go, and I said I wanted to go to Hawaii. I wanted to go to Hawaii or to Miami. And so, in the end, they sent me to Philadelphia.
That's close.
It's close, yeah. It happens, right? So anyway, I went to Philly, and there was no cigarette boats and no white suits, but they have a lot of museums in Philadelphia. And so one of the first cases I was assigned was the theft of artifacts, in fact, a crystal ball from the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. And also, there had been very recently when I got there, a robbery at the Rodin Museum, a gunpoint robbery where a sculpture called The Man with the Broken Nose was stolen, at gunpoint from the Rodin Museum in Philly. So I guess the situation was that I was on a property crime squad, and we were working mostly interstate transportation of stolen property and theft from interstate shipments. And most of the guys weren't that interested in going after crystal balls or Rodin sculptures. So because I was a new guy, I'm the one who got sent along with my partner, Bob Bazin, who you might remember, Ray.
I do.
Bob was the original art theft guy from Philly, and he was assigned as my training agent. So it worked out that when we worked on that case together, we solved it, and on both cases. And in the end, as a result, they sent me to art school. The office sent me to art school at the Barnes Foundation. They sent me for jewelry training at Zales Corporation in Dallas, and to the GIA in Santa Monica for diamond training. So as a result of all that training, once the Bureau does that, they invested you. You got to start working those cases.
Yeah, but you know what, Bob? You're a little different. Your upbringing, and your upbringing and you grew up in Baltimore, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you grew up in Baltimore, and your upbringing is a little special. Your dad owned a shop.
Yes.
What kind of shop was it? What kind of shop was that?
Let's get back to the art part of it in the FBI. People mistake art theft and talking about art with art history. And, having a background in art history is important, but it's not that necessary when it comes to these types of investigations. What you really got to have, Ray, is a background in the art business world, because basically art crime is all about money. And it's all about what you're going to do with the art when you have it, or how you sell a fake or a forgery. It's all about the business part of the art world, and that's a big business. It's about $200 billion a year that gets bought and sold worldwide when it comes to cultural property and all art. The illicit cultural property market is about $6 billion a year. So it's a lot of money involved in these crimes. My background, because of my parents, was working in an antique store. My dad had an Asian antique store in Baltimore, and occasionally I would go help him. I grew up around antiques. I grew up around that whole industry, so I knew how to do a deal in the art world, and that's what was important. So going undercover, working undercover to get these cases, investigated and solved. It was all about how to make a deal in the art world to convince the thieves, convince the forgers that you were who you really were, and that you could make them money.
That book, priceless, and it was priceless. I read it. Great book. I recommend it, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But in looking at and talking about the art of the deal, you almost sound like Donald Trump here with the art of the deal, right?
No,
but no, I know. But that's when you talk about it, you say the art of the deal and being able to make a deal in the art world. What I have no idea what that means. When you talk about making a deal, what is that?
Well, art's a little bit different from buying furniture or TVs. There's no set price oftentimes on artwork. Look, if it's a painting, it might be a canvas. The canvas and the paints themselves might be worth $10, in cost. But somebody wants to pay $1 million for a Renoir or 10 million for a Picasso. And why is that? It's because of the background, the history, the authenticity, the provenance of the art itself. So understanding all of that is part of the undercover operation. Usually the thieves who are out there doing these robberies, doing these thefts, they're not art aficionados. They're basically criminals who have gone out and done one art job. Okay, so they're selling guns, they're moving drugs, they're doing all kinds of things. And at the FBI, we used to look at these art crimes as what we call gateway crimes into groups that were doing multiple different types of violations. So the idea is to be able to go in and speak as a person who knows how to do a deal in the art world and can sell or buy that art to get the best price.
But Bob, just so we can clear it for our audience early on, it's one thing stolen art. I mean, that's something's taken off a wall at a museum, and your job is to come in and track it down the best you can. But as you know, as you know better than any of us, there are also forgers out there and forgeries. And there are people that make a full-time living at replicating or duplicating famous artwork, and maybe the stolen one this will be passed off as one that's been recovered, or someone will claim, oh, we found other artwork from Marc Chagall or someone like that, and it's very similar to his style, but it's not him. And that, of course, is where you would also come in, and people that do the kind of work you do to determine the veracity or the legitimacy of this type of art. So again, it's not just stolen stuff per se, as you well know, but it's also forgeries, and I'm sure that's a whole different part of what it is you do.
Yeah, as I say, that $6 billion art market, I think the estimates today are about three-quarters of that is frauds, forgeries, and fakes. It's not
Mm.
stolen art, and that's a different kind of case. I mean, when you go out and try to catch a thief who's going out and stolen artwork, say at gunpoint from a museum or something of that nature, that's a different type of investigation than you do with, say, a forger. Okay, catching a thief who's trying to sell an artwork, you might do an undercover operation where you act as a broker or as a gallery owner or something of that nature, where you can buy and sell the art. On the other hand, when you're dealing with a forger, it's not about interstate transportation of stolen property so much or recovery of stolen artifacts. It's more about fraud. So what violations are you going to be chasing? You're going to be chasing wire fraud, mail fraud. It's these types of crimes that they're committing, because what they're doing is they're trying to sell these fakes as real, and usually they're using the wires one way or the other, whether it's an email or the mail itself or something of that nature, to convince someone. And that's fraud, basically. That's basically the definition of fraud. And the use of the wire or the mail would be the federal violation. So that's how I would do those cases, as either a stupid buyer, somebody who didn't know anything about the art, but just had more dollars than cents, or I would do it as a shady dealer who had clients that we were gonna cheat together, and then go and conspire together to be able to cheat these clients. And of course, along the way you're getting wire, getting emails and letters and things back and forth. That proves knowledge, and that proves all the elements of those crimes.
Bob, just following up on this part, besides the recognizability that you would have or an expert would have in saying, oh, that's fake because that blue is tinged in a different way that this artist would have done, are there also forensic techniques nowadays where you can age an older painting, of course, without damaging it per se, but any kind of sophisticated items that could be used in a laboratory to say this is not 100 years old, this is 1 year old, something like that, besides, of course, someone like you knowing what's real and what's not from the artistic perspective?
Well, the first thing I got to tell you, Jim, is I never knew if something was real or not real until I had it looked at by experts. I mean, that wasn't my
Okay.
call as an investigator. I'm not a authenticator or connoisseur to that degree of any specific artist. Generally, we would know that the pieces that were being offered were fake, because the people would tell us this is fake and this is what was happening.
Hmm.
But the thing is this: there are all kinds of forensic evidence that can be put together today to look at artwork that has anachronisms in it. It's interesting, though. You can look at it like a Jackson Pollock painting, and you can find anachronistic paints in it. In other words, paints that didn't exist in 1950 when he was painting
Oh,
those
right.
things
Yeah.
and making those drip paintings, or say, those paintings didn't exist. But there's always an explanation. It could be that the painting was being retouched in 1975, or there had been some damage and was being fixed, and so other paintings were put in. That was a case that we looked at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, to look at a Pollock painting, and it was legitimate because the what do you call it, the curators had done some work, conservators had done some work to touch the painting up in the 1970s and use paints that weren't available in 1950. So there is a whole world of forensics to identify fakes and forgeries in artwork. They can look at canvas, they can look at the stretchers that hold the paintings apart. Mark Rothko used a specific type of stretcher from a store in New York City. That store is still there, but all those stretchers came from there. So if you don't have that stretcher on your Rothko, it's not going to be right. He used certain kinds of
Interesting.
canvas, specific ones. Pollock and Rothko both used paints that were experimental at the time, and they didn't exist in big bunches. So again, you can look at that and see what the paints, if they existed or not, when they were doing these paintings. You go all the way back to the Impressionists. Cezanne used all kinds of paints. There's a specific yellow that comes from a plant that comes from the urine of cows in India. And that
Oh boy.
yellow was banned by the Indian government in the 1890s because of the sacredness of the cows. But they could still get that yellow, pigment in France and south of France, where Cezanne was, all the way up until 1915, 1920. So it still existed. So all those things are part of the art history, part of the forensics of putting a painting together.
Very interesting.
Let me go back to the FBI and when you first got involved in this. There came a point in time where you start getting called on quite often, to the point where you started doing some traveling, you started doing some undercover work. With that, what was your backstory for the undercover? What did they make you out to be? I know there's always a drop story behind you. What was that? What was that like, Bob?
I had a bunch of them. It all depended on the type of case, Like I
Right.
said, if it was a fraud or forgery case, it would be, a shady dealer who had clients who wanted to buy this artwork. I knew they were fake, and the faker knew they were fake, but my clients wouldn't know. So basically, I was just gathering evidence, for them to show knowledge. So that would be one thing I could do. Another one would be maybe a professor of art working with thieves to try to sell their art. So they called me in Spain. They had a case. They called me the professori, of the artwork. So it all depended on the situation. As I said, sometimes I just played a dumb dealer. I mean, a dumb buyer who didn't know what they were buying, and so could be taken easily, as a con. So it depended on what was needed for that specific case.
All right, I'm going to ask you this, a two-part question. All right. First one is, who is the dumbest SOB you came across in all your years uh, buying and going undercover with the artwork?
The dumbest was probably one of my supervisors that was in Boston. You mean criminal?
You lobbed them a softball,
I
Ray.
know.
What did you expect?
Hey, look, hey, that's good. That's good. I love that because I know that's true. I know it's true. Yeah, I mean, I know it's
I ran
true.
into a lot of headway, with supervisors. Not in Philly, not in Philadelphia where I was. They were all great, but in other offices, they just didn't get it. So it was a kind of a fight up until about 2005. And then we started the National Art Crime Team as a result of that investigation that we did in Sweden. And, it became popular then. And then all of a sudden, then it was a different kind of headway. Everybody wanted a piece of the action. And that made it
Yeah,
difficult to actually do the work because everybody wanted to be on the front page of the newspaper when we had a recovery. And I was the guy in the back of the room who was undercover who didn't want to be on the front page of the newspaper. Didn't do me any good. Everybody else
right.
wanted to be. So everybody wanted credit for everything. And
Yeah.
I used to say, look, just let us finish the case. And once we're done the case, you can have all the credit. It's okay with me. I don't care. But just let us finish the case. And many times it didn't work that way. It was tough.
It's funny you say that, and Jim can probably relate to this too.
Mhm.
I remember when profiling first came about in like 1992. I'm in there, and I just transferred in from Buffalo in '91 after 3 or so years, and I came around the same time you did, Bob. And they said, "Hey, look, we need to send someone down to the NCAVC, down to the Behavioral Analysis Unit, for training as is profiling it." And all the guys, and on the squad right next to you, where I was, the squad right next to you, Squad 10, and you were on Squad 4, they said, "You know what? I'm not going down for that hocus pocus bullshit." I said, "I'm not going down for that." And so the supervisor comes to me and he says, "Ray, you're going." And I was like, well, I was okay with it because I was really into it. And nobody understood that stuff.
That
But as
Tom,
time
that was
passed,
Tom
yeah,
McQuaid, wasn't
that was Tom McQuaid. But God rest his soul. But the same thing with the art stuff. Nobody understood that, Bob. That's why they didn't want anything to do with it because they didn't understand it. This is bull crap. This is a regular thing here. The hell with this stuff. That's why you didn't get the support. That's why they were idiots up in Boston.
it?
Because
That,
they didn't get it.
well, part of the problem up there was that they had the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist in 1990.
Yeah,
And, the problem was they wanted to solve that crime. And I don't blame, they still haven't. It's been 31 years or 35 years, 34 years, something like that. And they still haven't. And, I was fighting with them in 2005, 6, 7, 8, doing undercover operations in Miami, in Barcelona, in Marseille. It was just terrible work, but somebody had to do it.
yeah, yeah.
But the point was, they just wanted to be the ones to solve it, and they couldn't stand the idea that somebody would come in and be able to do that.
Bob, you brought up that Isabella Stewart Gardner case from St. Patrick's Night, or at least the morning after of 1990. I watched a documentary on it. I remember when it first happened, and there's a $10 million reward for the recovery of, I'm not sure if it's one or all of those pieces. I'm sure wherever they are, they're spread out. You may have other opinions, but or in some closet somewhere, who knows? People are afraid to show them. We can get into that a little bit. But they estimate back in the day, maybe $100 million was the value. Nowadays, they're saying upwards of $600 million is the value on these 13 pieces of art. I get those numbers are fluid. They could go back and forth, probably not lower with inflation. But that case always amazed me from the early days. It was, like you said, these are probably a couple of thugs that came in. They dressed as cops and they kind of tied up the security people. They probably didn't know one piece from the other. Someone could have pointed earlier on, get this, get that. And then, of course, the bosses got hold of it and they took it from there. So whether it's mob involved and you know, it stayed domestic, it went international. Are there any theories you have about that case at this point? If you're authorized to express
what I
them?
thought it was, what I still think is that, as I say, in 2005, I had information from a Parisian police officer. I met him at the Louvre, by the way, and that's where we sat and talked. He told me he had a person that he knew of that was in Miami, who was a Frenchman who had access to the Vermeer and the Rembrandt seascape. It's called The Storm Over the Sea of Galilee.
Mm.
So I was able to get introduced to this individual in Miami, and I was undercover as a very rich dealer who had clients who wanted to buy these paintings, and we negotiated a price of $30 million for the two paintings. Uh, Throughout that 3 year operation, we did recover, let's see, two Picassos worth 60 million that were stolen from Picasso's granddaughter Diana from her apartment. We got those an undercover operation in Paris. We recovered four paintings that were stolen from the Museum of Fine Arts in Nice, France, Sicily, a Monet, two Bruegels. They were stolen at gunpoint in a gunpoint robbery, and we got those back in an undercover operation in Marseille. They, when we caught them, they actually had a 45 caliber pistol and a Chechen hand grenade in the car. So these weren't nice people. But the thing was, by the time we got all that done, my cover had been blown on our Vermeer and our Rembrandt. So we didn't get those back. But the French police, they had wiretaps where they heard my bad guy, talking about getting the Rembrandt and the Vermeer delivered to him in Marseille to be sold to me. So that's why the French police believed it was a real case and that this could be the things that was happening. But unfortunately, like I say, the undercover was taken apart. We all believed that the paintings were in Corsica, those two paintings. Now I'm not saying I don't know where the other 11 pieces are, but those two we thought were in Corsica. And what's really interesting about that, one of the things that was stolen in the robbery in 1990 was a finial off of a flag. Now, these guys went around the museum for an hour and a few minutes, and they stole 13 objects. Some of them were ridiculous, like a few $100 Rembrandt etching, just an etching, and some other pieces that had minimal value. But one of the things they took was a finial, and this finial was the eagle, what they call the Corsican eagle. So it was the symbol of the island of Corsica, the first regimental guard of Napoleon. Now think about that. That was Napoleon's Corsica. It was his first regimental guard. It was the flag, and on top of that flag was this eagle finial, the Corsican eagle. So that's missing. Well, nobody could figure out why they would still, stop and take this thing off of a flag while they're doing an art heist, right? Well, when we did this investigation, it turns out that the information was that these two guys had these two paintings, and they were in Corsica. And it kind of makes sense now that, if you steal these paintings and take them to Corsica, during the 1940s, the people of France asked for those paintings back, and not the paintings, the flags, because they were the cultural property of Corsica, represented the first Napoleonic Guard, and they never were given back. So, maybe they took the eagle finial to give a little clue as to why they were taking these paintings.
Wasn't there also was it a work by Rembrandt at the Boston Museum some famous painter, that they didn't realize it was actually painted on wood, and it was so heavy and maybe so large they couldn't just cut it out of the frame, and they left it behind. So that's what lent me to that. They didn't really know necessarily what they were taking, although that Corsican item that you talked about could have been on their top of their list by whoever their
Right,
sponsors
right.
were. So,
Problem,
but they didn't get the big one out the window. I was told it was, or out the
yeah,
door. It was
the
so
problem
heavy.
is that the Rembrandts that they stole, they cut out of the frames. And so after 30 years, the canvas starts to lose its elasticity, and there's going to
Oh,
be a lot of damage on
sure.
those. But now, luckily, the Vermeer was taken on the stretcher, so that should probably be in pretty good shape. There is a $10 million reward. It's based upon the condition of the paintings, so it is prorated per painting and upon condition. So if you
Oh,
get the Rembrandt back and it's completely destroyed, there's no reward for that. Whereas if you get the Vermeer back and it's in good shape, you might get $3 million. So it depends on the situation.
Hmm. Interesting.
so Cold Red listeners and watchers, you have an objective now. Maybe you only get 5 million, but you know what?
Yeah,
That's
well, if
not too
anybody out
bad.
Tim,
there knows where they're at, please give us a call and we'll work
yeah,
this
listen,
out.
I like to get
Yes.
10%, since we're putting this out there. I want a finder's fee on this here,
You
at
got it.
least 10%. I'm just
You-
kidding. All right.
Well, then me
I
too.
know you two. I'm not going to cut you out. I'm even going to cut Bob in, you know?
All right.
that's
All
the
right.
big, huh?
Yeah, there you
That's
go. All right. Now, the second part of that question. I know you've done a lot of undercover. You told us a little bit about some things, but when you get in these undercover situations, sometimes these situations can turn on a dime very, very quickly. And I'm talking about becoming very dangerous, where it's full of twists and turns. Can you enlighten us about something that you were involved in during your career, where it was kind of tied into something like that? Kind of enlighten our listeners to something like that, Bob.
Well, anytime you work as an investigator, and whether you're undercover or overtly or covertly, when you're talking about taking away people's freedom, it's always a dangerous situation. And often, and the difference between an
Yeah.
FBI agent working a criminal investigation and, say, a police officer is that a police officer doesn't run into felonies every day. In other words, everybody we would deal with as an FBI agent was basically a felon. I mean, that's the kind
Right.
of people we were investigating. They weren't misdemeanors or anything like that. So they were always bad guys. And in the end, if they're doing armed robberies, they're the worst of the bad guys. So in the end, you are dealing with people who will willingly take your life. So working, in that situation, you're always, looking out for your best interests and the best interests of your partners. I had cases. I had one case undercover where the I told you about the two Picassos that were recovered in Paris that were stolen from Diana Picasso. They were worth about $60 million. And ultimately, when that happened, the police officer in Paris who was working with me, somehow the guys got arrested and they got an idea that I was an informant, not an FBI agent, but an informant. So they sent a team, we called them Salt and Pepper, to Miami to basically knock me off, as an informant, murder me. And we had a meeting at the Diplomat Hotel in a bar at the Diplomat, where I convinced them not to do that, that we could do more business together. That wasn't me. It must have been wiretaps on the international phone lines or something, but it wasn't me. And so I guess they kind of figured that that maybe that was the best way to go. Maybe discretion there would be the better part of valor, since they wanted to make more money. And besides that, I had a gun in each pocket, and they used knives. So I figured they brought knives to a gunfight. We'd have to see how that
And,
worked out.
and now,
Well, obviously you're still with us. Where did those guys wind up,
They
Bob?
actually, because they didn't actually do anything, they ended up just going free. In other words, they didn't threaten me at
Okay.
the moment. They were sent and told, by these guys in Paris to take care of this guy, and that meant to, to knock me off. But because they didn't do it, and we talked it out, basically they were let go.
well, It's funny, but a lot of times you say, well, you know what? How much did they offer you to do it? I'll double it, not to do it, and then we'll go ahead and make some money.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, hey,
Yeah,
Bob, I'll tell you,
I have to
I
knock
can't
myself.
imagine. Yeah, I can't imagine being in that situation.
So the reason we didn't really arrest him or anything also was because we didn't want to blow the case. If they had gotten arrested for that, they would have known I was either an informant or an FBI agent. So in order to keep the cover going, we just let it go, and we kept moving from there, trying to get that Vermeer and that Rembrandt.
A little bit in the art world for me. I had a chief of police when I was in Ben Salem Township. His name was Rich Viola. He's still around. He is Rich Viola. And he was a sergeant in the Philly PD. And I described him as kind of a Renaissance man. And he was the first person I ever met that was an art collector. And he started as a Philly cop. He met some art collectors in Philly, or art distributors, whatever they're called. And they would pay him to fly overseas and take art with him and deliver it, usually to Paris. And they would pay him decent money. And he would actually fly armed, but he wouldn't tell the airline. This is back in the early 70s, whatever. And he finally said one day, hey, instead of paying me $2,500, $5,000, which was back then a lot of money, he said, how about give me one of these little art pieces, whatever. Yeah, okay, well, that'll be your pay for this job. And he kept it. And whoever that artist was died like a month later. And it automatically, of course, went up a whole lot in value. Anyway, when I left the Ben Salem PD to go to FBI, so I learned a lot. I've been to his house. He has his own little art gallery. He collected more since then, sold and traded. He gave me a book, Flash Ahead Unabomb. We searched Ted Kaczynski's home, not the cabin. We searched his home in Chicago where he grew up, or at least he lived in his later years with his family for about 2 years when we first started bombing. And they searched the house, found nothing. And as the agents are walking out the door, oh, you know what? There's a fake wall that we never tore down. And it's not load bearing. It has no, purpose to it. The agents go back in, take the wall down. And what do they find but a lithograph of a Toulouse-Lautrec work known as At the Circus, Performing Horse and Monkey. And it's hidden behind a wall. And you probably are familiar with it. And but if you look at it, actually, it's above my desk now. I'm looking at it. It's sort of a bulbous clown with a whip in his hand with a horse or a donkey and a little monkey. And if you read the manifesto of the Unabomber, you know that this clown is big business, big government, and the animals are basically us, the people, the proletariat, the bourgeois, in that regard. But the key to it all was Toulouse-Lautrec in 1899, when this piece was put out. He had a very distinctive way of signing his name. And if you look at it, it looks like FC. And if you know anything about the Unabomb case or read the manifesto, that was his nickname, FC. The title of the Manifesto, Industrial Society and its Dangers, whatever, by FC. The bombs all had FC on it. So here, Ted Kaczynski hid this. It wasn't anything of value. It was a lithograph, just a copy he bought from, a bookstore somewhere. But he had that hidden. And that shows you what the world was to him, how important that piece was to him. And actually, I wrote him a letter years later and offered him to, I'll give him a copy of that for his cell if he'd let me come and interview him. But he wasn't that interested, and the deal never worked out. Of course, now he's deceased. But it got me back into, I lose that book that the chief Viola gave me at the time, that art book, to look up that Toulouse-Lautrec painting from 1899. And I saw the little FC there. Maybe in post-production, we can get it up here and show the audience on the visual part of it. And I just think an interesting aspect there. So I did have some interesting connection to the art world on a personal level while still a police officer, and then later with the Unabomb case too. Yeah. And
so that one that
funny
you
how
have
that all worked out
above your desk, is that the one that Ted
had?
Yes, it was a gift. My then fiance gave it to me as a gift. Natalie's now my wife, and for one Christmas, and I'm looking at it right now.
It's not the exact one Ted had.
It's not the exact one. That's in evidence somewhere. But I did get to see it. I was the first one to see this funny little round signature of Toulouse-Lautrec, which I think he did. I mean, as you know, artists do signatures different over time. It's not always the exact same signature, which, of course, I'm sure you've looked at possible forgeries, or you've worked with people who did. and say, oh, no, in 1850, that's not how he signed it. He signed it this way. And that's one way of telling a forgery. Of course, the really good fake, phony, and fraud artist will know that, or they should. But that is one way, the actual signatures, if you will, and how it's done to tell
exactly.
whether it's
I mean, well, signatures can be faked pretty easily. It's more difficult to fake all the forensics. You know, that had the correct paints, the correct age of the canvas. I mean, you know, where do you find 300-year-old canvas today? You know, it's tough. So these are the types of things that are really hard to find that good forgers can use. The issue today, like the biggest fraud case recently was the Nodler Gallery case in New York City, and that involved about $60 million worth of fake ABEX art, abstract expressionist art. You know, Clifford Still, Mark Rothko, the people we talked about. And so they had a guy that was actually a Chinese guy in Brooklyn who was painting these things and selling them for no money to a gallery in Manhattan, who then would take them to the Nodler Gallery in New York City, and they would be selling them for millions of dollars. So the problem with those is that canvas still exists. That paper still exists. It's easy to get. It's not forensically. It's hard to identify it. You know, you have to look at the paints and see if they, and if the paints from the 1950s and 60s are still out there, still available. So all of that stuff is easy to make. You know, the biggest faked artist is Marc Chagall, because his material is it's very easy to fake.
Oh.
Interesting.
Okay, I hope the few presentations I went to of his art, I hope I was seeing the right thing. I would know the difference.
The biggest theft,
maybe some others would.
The painter who has the most pieces stolen is Picasso. There's more stolen Picassos than anything else, any other specific painter. And the reason for that is because he was so prolific. He did so many artworks.
Right.
You know, with his prints, just say there's one series called the 347 series that he did in 1968, and that was 347 prints over the course of about 8 months. And each print was published 50 times. There was 50 copies of each. So if you think about it, if you just multiply that out, you're talking about 18,000 artworks, you know, just that one series for that one period of time. So it just, you know, it's mind-boggling how much material is out there by Picasso.
Wow.
Bob, if I can just, I know, Ray, you have some, but I'm a behavioralist too. And I guess what I'm wondering is, there may be thugs that steal stuff. They may be a little more sophisticated than that, probably have burglaries in their background. But who are what's the mindset? What kind of people want to buy these stolen artwork or sculptures, whatever it may be, when they know they really can't exhibit it? It's only for essentially for their private showings. I mean, we're talking about the end user here. I know there may be some middlemen in between, but what kind of person is that? Besides being, I'm sure, extremely wealthy, have you ever come across any of these people? Why did they want to have a stolen piece of art that essentially only they can look at?
Yeah, there's a couple of answers to that question, because you have to look at the different tiers of thieves, you know, to answer that question. Now, we're not talking about fakes and frauds and forgeries here, the actual theft people. And there's 3 different tiers of thieves. There's the professional thieves who do all types of crime and who are out there and they happen to do an art robbery. So they go and they rob a museum. You know, it's not what they always do, but that's what they did. And their motivation is to make money. So what they want to do is try to sell the paintings. And their biggest problem is that the real art in an art heist is not the stealing, it's the selling. And they get caught when the artwork comes to market. So there's nobody out there that's paying $3 million for a $30 million stolen painting. It doesn't happen, okay? So that's a fallacy. That's something that started back around 1962 with Dr. No, the famous James Bond movie. And at that time, Dr. No had his caverns, and there was a stolen Goya. The year before, a Goya was stolen from the National Gallery in London. And one of the producers of Dr. No saw the article in the paper and thought it'd be interesting. So what he did was he turned around and he got a copy made of the painting, okay? And he put it on an easel. And when Sean Connery went into the Dr. No's caverns, he saw the easel and made this look like, I wondered where that went, you know? And it was all it was tongue in cheek, you know, and the producer did it that way. And
Right.
so
I get it.
ever since then,
I get it.
everybody thinks there's this Dr. No sitting in his basement staring at his stolen art. And that's not
Right.
what's happening. So that's the one tier. Now, and the
Okay.
interesting end of that story is somebody stole the reproduction after the movie was made. It disappeared. So
No
anyway,
way.
yeah,
That's
yeah, it's the
great.
truth. They ended up
That
getting
is
that. They
great.
got the painting back the next year, but anyway. So that's the one level. That's the armed robbers and ones who go out and steal these $1 million artifacts, paintings, try to sell. What you're talking about is the second two levels. The second level of that is shoplifters. Okay, that's people who go in these historic homes, they go into museums, and because they can get away with it, they steal these things. They don't go to sell them. They do it for the thrill, and they get a thrill out of it. They take it and they stick it into a private room somewhere in their house and just hide it. It's not that they want the item; it's they want the thrill of stealing. They're kleptomaniacs. So that's another
Hmm.
level. The third level are the it's interesting. It's the curators. It's the curators, the experts, the historians, and I've had cases where I've caught them, and they'll be doing this for years. They'll steal hundreds of items, and when you interview them, you find out that they have this mindset that because they know about this material, they know it, they study it, they love it. Why can't they have it? You see, in other words, it's in the museum and it's in a storage unit, and so nobody's looking at it and nobody cares about it except them. So why can't they have it? They have a right to it, and it's a very funny mindset. It's like they don't believe that they're stealing. They think that they're actually caretaking the material better than a museum or better than someone else is.
Makes
And
sense.
it's a weird collector's mind, and I've seen
It
that
makes
happen
sense.
too. Yeah.
Hmm.
But that's not $1 million paintings. That's usually smaller items. I had a case in Philadelphia at the Historical Society where a maintenance man was selling one piece at a time for 7 years to an electrician who'd done work in the Historical
Hmm.
Society. And in the end, we found in the electrician's house he had one of the finest collections of U.S. historical items in the country, worth $2.5 million, more than 200 pieces. And this was over a
Wow.
7 year period, one piece at a time. And that was his whole thought. I mean, I love this stuff. Why can't I have it? It was just interesting.
I hope he at least had the room well lighted
He had good
on the works.
electronics for his
It's the
alarms,
least you could
better
hope.
than the museum.
I'll bet. I'll bet.
There you,
I'll bet.
there you go.
Well,
Yeah.
let me throw this. I'm going to throw this by in, and maybe you could talk about each one. You've been recognized internationally, and even received accommodations from many political leaders, both foreign and domestic, because you recovered various artifacts. I'm wondering if I mention each award that you got, you could tell me why you got that award from that entity. So, for instance, the first one was in 2000. It was the Peruvian Order of Merit for Distinguished Service, and it was presented by the president of Peru. What was that? What was that for? If you remember.
It's interesting because it was Alberto Fujimori who's in prison. He was the president at the time, and I think he's in prison right now in Peru. Anyway, that was that was for recovery. That's not unusual in Peru, right? I mean, it's
No, I
multiple.
agree. I agree.
One to the next.
Mm.
But that was for recovering a 2,000-year-old artifact that was looted from a tomb. It was a golden piece of body armor, and it's the largest piece of gold ever found in a tomb in the Americas. It was taken out and being
Wow.
offered for sale. It was actually smuggled into the United States by a diplomat from the Panamanian consulate in New York City. This guy was the consul general, and so he was trying to sell it to me for 1.6 million. And we were able to do an undercover deal where he was arrested, and we were able to recover this piece and give it back to the people of Peru.
Oh, nice. Very nice. How about in 2001, John Ashcroft, the Attorney General at the time, provided you with an award for outstanding contributions in law enforcement. What was that for?
That was just in general because the AUSAs I was working with put my name in for it.
Okay.
You know how that goes, right?
Yeah,
It
I
was,
do.
it was
In
in general, just general work. Yeah.
All right.
And
No,
and he
the
never wound
AUSAs
up in
did.
prison, so that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we don't know
They're
about the
defense
U.S.
attorneys.
attorney. Yeah. All right, 2003, you received by the Spanish National Police. They give you the White Cross of Law Enforcement Merit Medal.
Right. That was for the undercover operation we did in Madrid. New York office had developed information from an informant that he could introduce us to this gang in Madrid who had stolen $60 million worth of paintings from a woman who was married to the chief industrialist, steel magnate in Spain. He was a friend of the king. And so we went over to Madrid. We started this operation. I posed as a collector and dealer and art professor for the Russian mob. And we offered 10 million for these paintings. We actually went into a nice hotel room down in the center of Madrid, and we were able to do the operation. And we recovered all the paintings for for the country. So as a result, we were given the Spanish Award of Merit for police.
Nice, very nice. 2004,
impressive.
You get the Robert Burke Memorial Award for excellence in cultural property protection. That was given to you by the Smithsonian Institute at the National Conference on Cultural Property Protection. Was that what was that about, Bob?
That was just in general for years of working these types of cases, and being the I guess the person from the FBI who did those operations.
And then in 2010, you get the Safe Beacon Award. Now, SAFE stands for Saving Antiquities for Everyone. What was that? Was that just accumulation? I mean, and now you're not in the Bureau anymore. In 2010, you're out of the Bureau.
Right. Yeah, that's accumulation of getting antiquities back. I mean, after I left the Bureau in 2008, I started my own company, Robert Wittman Incorporated, where we do investigations into theft, into frauds, forgeries, fakes, and we also do security for museums, institutions, and provenance research for collectors. Mm-hmm. So all types of art business that we get into.
Now, before we went on the air, we were talking about last week. You were in Vienna. What were you doing in Vienna? What was that all about?
I'm part of a task force. It's called the Transnational Task Force against the looting of artifacts and transportation across borders. So it's with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE. And this task force, we go around different countries in Europe, training police officers, customs officers, prosecutors on how to do investigations and how to identify these stolen objects, when they come into their countries. Right now, the emphasis is on Ukraine, of course, because of all the looting and damage to the museums, institutions. In Ukraine, we're seeing a lot of things coming across borders, being transported out. So it's basically raising awareness with all these different law enforcement agencies to try to stop that illicit transportation.
And you also said that you do another gig besides that business you have. You go on cruise ships. I think that's pretty neat. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I'm on Seabourn luxury cruises, and I take a couple of cruises a year. And it's a nice way to take a little vacation. And also I do lectures on the ships. So as a result, I get to go on the cruises gratis, but I can do the lectures, 2 or 3 lectures or whatever, over the course of a couple of weeks. And, I get to see the world a bit.
Nice. That is nice. Now, Bob, you've written, go ahead.
Ray, I was going to say, based on what we just heard from Bob, I think he wins the Indiana Jones Award for the Cold Red podcast. I don't think anyone has come closer to real life Indiana Jones.
Yeah, but
Bob. You must have heard that before, Bob.
I kind of embraced that for a while, but then I kind of let it go because Indiana Jones was a looter, so it's really kind of not in vogue right now with collectors and all the people that are trying to stop illicit transportation of artifacts. So because he was a looter. It's not. I kind of stopped using that. Hey,
so we'll call you Pennsylvania Whit or Whitman, something like that.
That works for me. Well,
there you go.
As we kind of wrap this up now, you've written a couple books here. even your career with ACT that we talked about, the Art Crime Team. But the first book was priceless. Um, I mean, I read that book. I've even read The Devil's Diary as well. But priceless, it was almost like I was there with you because you talked about a lot of things that were familiar to me on the squads, in the city, all these type of things, other than when you were growing up. But what a fantastic book. I couldn't put it down, Bob.
Well, you
I mean,
you know it's true because you were there.
well, yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, but I mean, it was just amazing, when you sit down and read that, and I just thought, wow, and here that book is a New York Times bestseller. I mean, and that doesn't happen that often to people, and you should be congratulated. But what 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 made you even think to write a book? What was behind that? I mean, where did the idea come from?
I wanted to really I wanted to get the word out to try to let people know that it's important to protect cultural heritage and to protect our art for our children, and our grandchildren. I think that a lot of times people don't take art seriously. They think of it as like a rich man's game where, it's some guy's going to get something stolen and an insurance company's going to pay for it. But it's more than that. It's our history and our heritage. And when these things go missing, sometimes, we lose a piece of our heritage, and it's something that needs to be protected. So I wanted to write a book that, not only did it tell the stories, but was interesting for people, that they would find it interesting and enjoy it, but then learn a little bit about the importance of cultural heritage at the same time.
What about your now? I kind of told everybody what Priceless was about. It was about your career, time you grew up, your career all the way through the FBI. But tell us about The Devil's Diary. Tell
The
us about
Devil's
that book.
Diary that's later on, that book came out in 2016, and that was about an investigation. Part of it was about an investigation we did for the U.S. Holocaust Museum. They called me in 2013 and asked me to do an investigation to try to find the diary of Alfred Rosenberg. Rosenberg was the chief civil scientist for Adolf Hitler. Met Hitler in 1919, pretty much in many ways made Hitler into the man that we know of today. When he met Hitler, he was just he was a corporal in the army, and he was basically spying on Alfred Rosenberg's Nazi party to try to find out what they were doing to report back to the government. And what happened there was that Adolf Hitler fell in love with the philosophies and the ideas that Rosenberg was putting out. And as a result, he became his greatest student. And then he overtook Rosenberg because Rosenberg was a thinker. He wasn't a big speaker. He knew that this kid, Adolf Hitler, was, he had the charisma and he could pull it off. So he brought Hitler into his fold, made him his student, actually was surpassed by him. And Hitler, of course, became the head of the party. But when Hitler went to jail in the mid 1920s for a year, he made Rosenberg the head of the party while he was away. So that's how much of a trust he had in Alfred
Wow.
Rosenberg. Yeah. So this diary was written between 1935 and 1945 when Rosenberg was hung after the Nuremberg trials. He was one of the top 10, the first 10 Nazis that were executed, and it went missing because one of the prosecutors at the Nuremberg trial, the U.S. prosecutor, stole it, basically, took it and sent it back to Pennsylvania. He was living in Philadelphia at the time. And it went missing. It had never been transcribed or translated. And so the Holocaust Museum was very interested in getting this back because there's very few, first-hand accounts from the highest reaches of the Third Reich. Rosenberg was the Reich Minister of the East. He was in charge of Russia, Poland, Hungary, all of that. And he was also
Right.
the person in charge of recovering or stealing all the art in Europe, all those artifacts to bring back to the future Fuhrer Museum in Munich. So as a result, he had all of that on his plate as well. This diary was missing, and it wasn't a diary like to be published. A lot of those guys wrote, a few of them wrote diaries that they were going to publish, talking about how great they were and all that, all the propaganda. Rosenberg didn't do that. This was his actual thoughts. This was him sitting down after his meetings with Hitler, after his meetings with others, and writing down his thoughts at night. And so it was about 400 pages. It had never been transcribed or translated. and we really didn't know what was in it. Nobody knew. It's brand new stuff from, like I said, the highest reaches of the Third Reich during the war that was contemporaneous. So they hired my company to go out and try to find it. We did find it. Ultimately, we got it back. And then the book is about the recovery, the investigation, and then about three-quarters of the book is actually talking about what's in the diary and coordinating that with what was happening during the war. So in other words, the day that Russia was attacked, the day that the Operation Barbarossa started, Rosenberg talks about being in his garden, taking care of his flowers, because he's growing his flowers because that's going to be Russia. When he goes into Russia, he'll be growing that flower, and so it's really a strange, kind of a strange way of looking at the war and what he was doing. And the other thing that the Holocaust Museum wanted was, nowhere is it actually written where Hitler said, destroy the Jews. He kept that at arm's length. All of them did. When they had their meetings, they would send their deputies, and they would not actually attend. The deputies would, but they knew what was going on. But they would never actually, put out a memo or anything like that with their names on it. So the museum was wondering if in this diary, if at some point Rosenberg would write, today the Fuhrer agreed with me to destroy the Jews, because it was his idea, to get rid of all the Jews in Europe. So that's what they were looking for, that smoking gun, because it's not out there anywhere at this point, and they're looking for that smoking gun to show that there was a direct connection. I mean, we all know there was, but
Sure.
it's not written anywhere, in history.
Wow. I tell you what, to our listeners, that's a book to get. I read it. I want to read it again, because now I have a different perspective looking at it and reading it, to get it from the horse's mouth here and then go back and read it. It'll make more sense to me, because there was a lot of stuff there that I'm thinking, wow, this is almost like a history book.
Yeah.
It almost reads like a history book. I'm thinking, wow.
It's a very dark, Priceless is fun to read, I think.
Yeah. I agree.
You can do it in 3 or 4 hours,
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
2 days. Half one day, half the next day.
Yeah, but
you know what I mean?
Devil's Diary, you'll laugh and you'll cry.
Yeah.
There's parts in there that are just very, very sad, with what was going on. And like I say, it was a hard book to write, because you had to delve into that part of history where there were a lot of demons.
Yeah. They are.
And Bob, those demons are still around today. And I would urge our audience to read that book and follow up on their history that doesn't end just a few weeks or a few months ago, but goes back 60, 80, a whole century, and find out some of the issues about the Holocaust, what led to it, and obviously the people like Rosenberg who influenced Adolf Hitler. And so I think folks who have a couple good reads out there, maybe a fun one with Priceless, but the other one certainly will give us a sense of history up to what's happening today in the Middle
History
East
does repeat
and
itself.
elsewhere.
It absolutely does. And
it does.
A lot of the themes,
yes, it does,
are, people learn from the past, and they use the same themes because they do work on masses of people. So it's very much a pertinent thing, for today.
Yeah, you would think people would know.
And those who don't learn from the past, will make the same mistakes as in the past.
Tell us, is there another book in you?
Not right now. It's too hard.
It is. Trust me, I've done it. Jim's done it.
Yeah.
Jim's on his fourth one.
It's hard.
It is.
It takes a long time. You got to find the right story, and a lot of the things that I look into, I find that they're long form articles, like for New Yorker or something like that, Atlantic Magazine. They're not books, and books are hard. They're hard to find.
I agree.
You guys know you do them. So
we're both authors too. We've both written books. So, are you going to continue what you're doing in your security and in your business? Is that your plan to continue with that?
Oh yeah. It's funny. I'm not going to stop. I enjoy what I do. And if you like what you do, you never work a day in your life, right? So it's the
That's
truth.
the truth.
Yeah,
That's
and
the truth.
you know what it's a funny thought. You know, people retiring. I knew an FBI agent when I was a kid, and he was in Baltimore. His name was Walter Gordon, great guy, and he was supervisor, white collar crime supervisor in the Baltimore office. This is back in 1960, right? So he retires and he sits on his porch. I guess he was on his porch maybe 6 or 7 years. Then he had a heart attack. And after he got left the bureau, he just kind of sat on his porch and read the newspaper. And I thought to myself, why would anybody want to do that? You can't do it. You got to
No,
keep
I'm
going.
with you.
Yeah. So that's
I'm
why
with
we all
you.
keep working.
That's it. You
Yeah.
have to do something. You know, you got to have a purpose every day.
Yeah.
Got to have a purpose. So, Bob, if someone wanted to reach out to you and say, you know what, I listened to this podcast. I heard this guy Bob Wittman talk. I'd like to have him come and speak at a gathering that I have, or I'd like to have him do something. How can they get a hold of you?
Oh, and just check out my website, right? RobertWhittmanInc.com, and it's WITTMANINC.com, or you can even send me an email, RobertWhittmanInc@live.com. So either way, any of those things, or call me on the phone. All the contact information is on my website.
Outstanding.
And remember, folks, if you have any stolen art, you can go right to Bob or come through us too, and we'll be the middleman for you
Right.
to return the art, not to steal it.
Look,
just to make
Jim's
that
got
clear.
a special room in
We
his
don't do the
house,
bad
Bob.
stuff.
I didn't
We
want
do
to
the
say
good
anything
stuff.
on the air. He's got a special room. You see, he's got something up on the wall there, right? He's not showing it to you. He's got another room. He's got another room back there too.
Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, you know how he is, right? So, is there anything else you want to add here, Bob, before we sign off?
No, I just want to thank you guys. You guys are doing a great job with this. It's a good podcast you got going. You guys are hardworking guys doing what you do now, and you were great agents. So it's great to talk to you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bob. Thanks for being here with Jim and I.
Likewise, Bob.
We really, really appreciate it. And Jim, take us home.
Yeah, this has been fun. We want to thank Bob Wittman for joining us today and giving our audience insight into an incredible career working for the FBI. And again, it's been great having you as a guest. Remember, everyone, subscribe to the Cold Red Podcast. Follow us on all Cold Red Podcast social media platforms and coldredpodcast.com. We'll see you next time with another colorful guest or interesting guest or special guest. We have different qualifications for them. Until then, stay safe. Be aware of your surroundings. It may just.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks, Bob. Have a good one.
All right, Matt.